Okay, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Ann Thesson, and I'm co-chairing with Maria Schatz today. You are in the session Communicating Across the GEO-BIO Divide. This is the first official session for our official new cluster, the Geodata for Health cluster. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm sure you've all sort of figured out how to use Sketch and Kiko Chat. So if you can go into the agenda and sign in, put your name and your affiliation at very least. That way we can keep track of all you wonderful people who are here with us today. So let's go ahead and dive right in. This particular session is going to be very breakout and discussion focused. We've got one very large goal that we want to achieve today, and that is the requirements gathering process. So let's go into that. So I've just welcomed you and kind of introduced what we're doing today. Then Maria and I are going to give you a few instructions and kind of prepare your minds for the asks that we have for you today. And then we're going to break up into groups. I think we have enough people in here to make 2 breakout groups here. I find that 3 to 5 people per group is ideal. If you want more groups, then that's fine too. And then we'll sort of take some time to prepare for the group discussion, to transition from the breakouts to the group discussion, and then we'll take some time to wrap up. So why are we even doing this? Why do we have a Geodata for Health cluster? 12 million people around the world die every year because they live or work in unhealthy environments. That's why this is important. And your location often defines your exposure to things like air, water pollution, heat waves, floods, and noise and light pollution at a minimum. Zip code can be a stronger indicator of heart disease than your genetic code, believe it or not. And climate change has exacerbated over 200 infectious diseases. Examples include Lyme disease and malaria. So it's really important that we're able to bring together earth science and clinical data. But there are no real clear standards or workflows for linking geospatial data with patient data. And these disciplinary divides prevent advancement of knowledge in this very critical area. So our goal here today is to gather requirements. We're going to be asking you all to think about use cases or themes or research questions that you have. And we're going to prompt you with some questions to put down on paper characteristics of the data that you use or have, or whatever processes or workflows or pain points you encounter. We'll provide you some use cases to get the wheels turning, but feel free to discuss those use cases. Feel free to ignore those use cases and think about your own. So first, I'm going to talk about a use case from my own research. And I'm very interested in the impact of algal toxins on health. Now, algal toxins, you typically hear about harmful algae blooms, red tides, seafood poisonings. They get into the news when you have an acute toxic event, where you have people getting sick or going to the hospital or dying, or you have animals dying and getting sick on the beach. But we don't really understand a whole lot about the impact of low-level chronic exposures to these toxins on public health and health outcomes. So that's what I'm interested in, and because my lab created the National COVID Cohort Collaborative, I actually had access into a treasure trove of patient data at the national scale. And so my research question that I was interested in is, are COVID-19 patients who live in an area with high risk of chronic exposure to cyanobacteria toxins more likely to have a severe outcome? And by severe, I mean hospitalization or death. The data sets that I had to try to answer this question were the EPA cyan satellite observations. Now, this is detecting cyanobacteria from satellite imagery, translating that imagery into cells per milliliter concentration. I had point measurements from a local Department of Health. And I also had the patient data from the national, now it's called the National Clinical Cohort Collaborative, but at the time it was solely based on COVID. So I needed to be able to identify water bodies that posed a high risk of toxin exposure and then assign patients to either the high risk or the low risk groups based on their residential address. The EPA cyan data is, you make a data request by giving them a list of latitudes and longitudes, and they give you back a tabular data file with weekly observations, and every row is an observation with a latitude, a longitude, a human readable label to describe the water body and the location within that water body, because you can have multiple measurements from the same water body. And then the date of the image and the calculated cell concentration and a few other pieces of metadata about your request. The data from the Department of Health is just cell concentrations and toxin measurements that came from an actual human going out, putting eyes on the water body and collecting a sample. Those data are available it's a tabular data online for download from that Department of Health website. You have human readable water body and location names, and they also on the website have a map with dots showing where those water bodies are. You don't actually get the latitudes and longitudes. And then the N3C data, again, is tabular data, but they are in a protected enclave. There are federal laws that require that we protect patient data. So you have to go through a process of getting IRB approval and then getting a data use agreement. And there's this huge process, just know that at this point. And it's already very heavily processed for integration from multiple medical facilities. So in the US, we do not have nationalized healthcare. Every one of these hospital systems does things their own way. So there was a rather substantial amount of work that had to go into bringing these, I believe it's 84 different hospitals contributed COVID data to this resource. And because this enclave was consented, it wasn't technically consented in that way, but the purpose is to study COVID, so that's what all the data were normalized to as far as temporality goes. It was the first COVID-19 diagnosis. And then there was the case-controlled data, so every positive COVID patient was paired. There was a control that did not have COVID that was also in the enclave, so that you could use that. And the patient data included a 5-digit zip code, a state, and a county, and that's the only location data that I had, and that was the residential address. Those are fairly reliable in patient data because they want to be able to bill you appropriately. So they make sure that that residential address is correct. So my biggest pain point was manual integration using all these different maps. So first I had to bring together the 2 cyanobacteria data sets so that I could identify the high-risk water bodies. So that involved having a data set with latitudes and longitudes and the labels that Cyan used, and then the Department of Health labels, because they didn't have latitudes and longitudes, and the labels didn't always match. So there was a lot of using a couple different maps, visually comparing things, and then also using Google Maps to confirm different nuances. Like there would be things like park pond near the playground, or the dog park, or the turtle pond, or something like that. And I would have to go even looking on a park website to see where on earth is the turtle pond in this park. GeoNames was helpful for those of you who know what that resource is. And yes, the same water body can have multiple names. And some of them are similar. So Horseshoe Lake and Horseshoe Reservoir may or may not be the same water body, and you can have different water bodies with the exact same name. So that was very frustrating. And then once I had all that data, all the water bodies disambiguated and all the data assigned to the appropriate water bodies, I then had to find a map with the water bodies and the surrounding zip codes. That required some flipping back and forth as well. And because zip codes are imperfect are imperfect measures of exposure to like a source of something, like they can be, zip codes aren't these perfect little donuts around a water body, right? They can go off into oblivion. And so I had to really look to see, is the residential density in this zip code right next to the primarily next to the water body? Or are they like far away from the water body? You know, all those nuances. And then finally, at the end of all this, I had a list of high risk and low risk zip codes that I could import into N3C, into the enclave, in order to divide my patients into treatment and control groups. And then I was finally able to do my analysis. So that's my use case. Now Maria is going to tell you about these things called common data elements, which is something that is very popular. It's a data structure that's very popular in the National Institutes of Health.
So I come from a somewhat different perspective. As a scientific program manager for the Office of Data Science at the National Institute of Environmental Health Science, I work a lot with data standards. And why do we need data standards? Health researchers often need to compare or combine multiple data sets from different populations, from different health observation cohorts. And in order to do that, we should be asking core questions in the same way to merge these data sets. And apparently it's not easy. For some reason, everyone has their own creative way to ask the same question, to name the same variables. And to overcome this issue, NIH promotes something called a tool for standardized data collection that we call common data elements. And common data elements are standardized, precisely defined questions paired with a set of specific allowable responses using systematically these data elements supposed to be used systematically across different sites, studies, or clinical trials to ensure consistent data collection. We have a repository for these data elements that is called NIH-CD repository, and there is a link to this repository if you want to peruse it. There are very little environmental common data elements relevant to environmental exposure, unfortunately, at this point. It's very clinical. Just an example of what is clinical CDE, your question would be, what is the patient's height? And the allowable answer will be, it's a whole number using centimeters as the unit of measure within a defined range of values, because the height of a person couldn't be 5 centimeters, and it probably can be more than 230. I don't know what's the Guinness record of the human height, but you kind of want to allow reasonable values. But when it comes to geospatial variables, geospatial CDEs, it becomes much more complicated. Let's say we are looking at health impacts of wildfire. So what do we measure? Do we measure air pollution? Do we measure heat? For how long? What length of exposure is important? Is it important that you were exposed once? Or maybe you should be exposed 3 days in a row for the exposure to be clinically relevant. There are so many products, data products relevant to wildfire, and it's still very hard to find the one that is relevant for your research. So let's say if we try to break down the question that we want to ask in a standard way. We want to ask what, when, how much, and how long. And the answer is not just a numerical value and units. We need to know what the intensity, let's talk just about the intensity of exposure. Was it computed? Was it directly measured? If it was computed, what was the source of the raw data source? What model was used? What algorithm? If it's calculated, we also need to know whether we are looking at range, mean, median, max, mean during the indicated period of interest. And period of interest, as I just said before, it's also fluid. We can look at the period of interest of 1 day, 3 days, months, maybe a year. We never know. Like each researcher has its own idea of what's important, and that's what they study. If you're talking about directly measured exposure, what was the method? What was the instrument that measured the exposure? And so all these metadata are super important for us to document and to have it displayed somewhere in order to merge data, as I said, data from different cohorts. Because maybe you want to look at the effect of impact of wildfire in some different vulnerable population, or maybe you want to generalize it to a general population. You need to be asking same question and collected data in the same way. So, and our question, again, I come from a very biologically minded community, and it's sometimes very hard to find in these data products these metadata, these pieces of metadata. We don't always know where to look. And we might also be missing some important metadata aspects of the data product. And this is, again, it's kind of my open question to the earth science community. We are consumers of your data. So it's an open question. What do we need to look at? And and is there some standard way to shape this data and to label the data for us to be able to look and merge results in different cohorts? Yeah, that's back to you.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's think about what are some of the biggest barriers to using earth science data for health applications. Now, Maria just mentioned a lot of these more specific issues, but in this group, we're dealing mostly with people who work with health-relevant geodata, and people who need health-relevant geodata, and I'm one of the latter. So we have to worry about things like timing and temporal resolution. What are the characteristics of the data in reality that are being collected, that are available, versus what are the characteristics of the data that we need in order to answer our research question or to find some sort of a measurable outcome in someone's medical records. And then there's also the data latency issue. Do we need the data immediately, like in the sense of the wildfire maybe, and those sorts of immediate acute health outcomes, or can we take our time with it? Are we looking at some sort of chronic exposure? And then there's the data access issue. Access is a very big issue when you're talking about people's medical records. And then there's data format, of course, resolution and coverage. I think this audience understands the issues around there. Okay, so let's pause here. I see that there's something in the chat. Does anyone have any questions about the two sort of examples? That's not, what's in chat is not a question?
The chat says +1 GeoBIOs.
Ah, okay, great, yeah. So are there any questions about what we've covered so far? Yes.
I had a question on the common data elements. Tom Harris. Two questions on the common data elements. So one, not being a health scientist, to me, age was underspecified because it doesn't tell you whether the whole number is rounded or truncated or sealant. And that's actually been that's an issue with temperature data, and precipitation data. So I guess that's a comment, but I'm wondering if it was just a presentation conciseness issue. And the second question is, given the maturity of the analysis, when you're talking about common data elements for relevant environmental information, is it that if someone publishes, you want them to state that level of detail, or are you actually looking for a standardized metadata format that can be embedded in platforms? I hope the difference is clear.
Let's see. So for the first question about the age, that was just presentation, and age can be depending on the population, whether it's pediatric or adult. It can be days, weeks, months, or years. I suppose if it's years, we don't round. It's a whole number. But it's all described and displayed in the full format of the common data element. There's like long spreadsheet with all the details. And it's not, unfortunately, it's not always being taken into consideration. Yeah, sometimes you will have half months instead of 2 weeks, and we are a long way to go in order to convince people to actually use that. NIH is not super insistent for people to use that. It's encouraged, recommended, but almost never enforced. So the goal of CDEs is for data collection and having metadata, standardized metadata format. We have a few repositories, one called Bricks. I guess maybe Bricks right now the only one that requires usage of CDEs in order to upload the data. So, and even if the data initially was not collected in the correct way, they will work with you and map your metadata to the existing common data elements, which is not optimal because it takes a lot of time. It would be much better if people collected the data initially from the start in the required format. And I think this is I'm pretty sure this is the only platform that I know of that currently using CDEs embedded.
So, I guess, I use a lot of NASA, NOAA related sort of mass-produced derived products from satellite remote sensing. And everything you mentioned is embedded in the metadata for those products. But then a lot of researchers will do either alternative derivations or value-added derivations that are unique to that researcher for a specific purpose. And that would come out in a publication, not it's not a platform that you're getting data from, it's a one-off.
And that's fine. That's in my mind, it would be exactly what we want. You collect the data and standardize the weight, and then you derive from that whatever you need. But it's not happening. It's not what's happening now.
All right, do we have any other questions before we start more of a group discussion here? Okay. All right. Let me get this out of the way. Okay. So Maria and I just talked about two use cases. One was involving the health impacts of toxic algae. The other was involving the health impacts of wildfire. What are some other use cases, themes, or data sets, or research questions that you would like to consider during the breakout? We've got a couple of.
Well, the health impacts of exposure to natural disasters. So not just wildfires, but also things like hurricanes, flooding events, things like that, that could, affect people's healths.
Including mental health.
Right, including mental health. That was a comment in the room.
Health impacts of, for example, fracking on local populations, of, like exposure to PFAS and other kinds of things in, for example, water supplies. So there's a lot of examples of environmental pollutants and that are sort of point source and health impacts related to those.
Measuring or modeling lead exposures and impacts on health, including behavior, as well as more obvious physical.
I'll give an example, but I think it's part of a broader category. So lawn care products.
Oh,
But the broader category is household chemicals.
that reminds me of, someone was discussing like our toiletries, lotions and shampoos and things like that. I misspelled
I
household.
guess lawn care has an environmental component to it, so.
There are studies on consumer products.
Yeah.
I'll throw one out there that's maybe very specific to my area, which is, I live in the Willamette Valley, which is one of the biggest grass producers in the country.
Yeah.
And so the allergens produced by that are hugely impactful on people's health, and I don't think this is something that's really been looked at all.
Yeah, it like grows sod. It's really weird to drive through and you just see these huge rolls of sod.
It's beautiful.
Gonna have to.
Microplastics, nanoplastics, and health outcomes or impacts.
Okay, have we exhausted? I see there's another something in the chat. Is that a suggestion in the chat?
Karen Moe says health impacts of cumulative air pollution.
Okay. Yeah, like over your lifetime.
Sorry, the obvious, temperature, humidity effects,
Temperature, humidity, and,
and health. So
yeah.
low temperature and health. High, low temperatures and health.
It's again a question, are you considering the extreme that
Yeah.
maybe happened 3 times during your lifetime, or are you considering percentile 75?
Episodes.
It's just not easy to define.
Yeah.
That's one of the issues.
okay, we've got a lot of topics here. Unless anyone has a burning desire to talk about something that's not on here during the breakouts, I think we'll move to to the next stage, which is what do you guys want to talk about? Now, it could be that we've got enough people in here for 2 groups, but if there's 2 people who want to get together and talk about one of these and 2 people who want to get together and talk about something else, we can do more breakout groups. But the idea is we'd have 1 topic per breakout group. Some of these might be able to be packed in together because they're related. So let's figure this out. Okay, who wants to talk about the health impacts of exposure to all kinds of different natural disasters? And this can include mental health impacts. Do we have takers for that one? One person? Okay.
Part of your presentation that resonated with me most as a data scientist was the spatial showing.
The spatial, okay. Okay.
That's just a topic unto itself.
Okay, well, yeah, as I learned. Okay, so what about the health impacts of point sources like fracking or other sorts of like places that you can point and say that's the source of my pollution? Do we have a breakout group for that? Okay, so we've got 2. What about health impacts of lead exposure? And that will include behavioral health or like behavioral outcomes. Someone, okay. And the online people, we'll have you guys go into a breakout group as well. So be thinking about which one you want to take. And then we have the health impacts of household products. So this includes lawn care, this includes lotion, whatever's in your house. Do you have a taker for that one? Okay. And then we have microplastics and nanoplastics. Exposure, things like allergy-related health outcomes. Do we have one for that? You're going to go to disaster? Okay, that's fine. Okay. How about cumulative, long-term? This example here is air pollution, but it could be anything really. And then we have the typical temperature, humidity, and health, talking about extremes, episodic things, which could fall under disasters if you want to talk about heat waves. Okay, so it sounds like we've got 3 groups. Let's see if I can keep track of all of them. So go ahead and form your groups. We've got, let's do in the back corner over here, we'll do the health impacts of disasters, including mental health. Or you can be wherever in the room you want. But we've got that, and then we've got the point source exposures, which can be over here by Ruth. And then the lead exposures can be over here by Steve. And then what did the online people have any opinions about which one they want to do? Okay, well, they can decide what they want to do. So that means I need to make one more breakout sheet. So go ahead and get into your groups. We'll have a few minutes for that, and then I will give you your instructions once everyone has moved around. I'll tell you.
We have a nice stable society.
Uh-oh. Oh, I can do this over here.
I would say barriers and opportunities
I could join the source group instead of being a single.
Oh, okay.
Group.
Yeah.
That probably makes sense.
Yeah, okay, so maybe I don't need another breakout,
saves you work,
another
yeah.
paper,
That's
yeah.
good.
Okay, that works out then.
I would happily do that.
Okay, so we'll have group 1 be natural disasters and group 2 can be point sources. So when you go into this folder, the link to this folder is in the slides and it's in the Schedule session description. There should be a link to the breakout folder.
Right, so we're group 2, right?
Yeah, your group 2, the online group is the group 3. So at the very top, you can write down what topic you're discussing. So let's get back to the slides. Okay, so now that you're in your small groups, based on the topic, the first thing is to select a note taker. You can democratize this and make everyone the note taker. I don't care how you do this. Just make sure everything, that the sheet gets filled out. So go to your brainstorming template. We have some questions to inspire you. If you want to completely ignore the questions and write down what you feel, that's fine too. We've got 30 minutes to go through the whole thing. The bottom should be some questions to help you prepare for the group discussion. You do not have to get to those in these 30 minutes, but if you do, that's fine too. So go forth and brainstorm and let me know if you have any questions or issues. The online people are group 3. Okay, we don't have, we don't have a hell of a lot of time left. So how about, because I am going to be very selfish and self-centered, I'm going to have you guys say, like, in 1 or 2 or 3 sentences the thing that I want to hear, which is what should the cluster work on next? Yay! All right. So I'll start with you then, since you have an answer. So group 2 was the point source group. What do you think the cluster should address first? And let's find the microphone. Oh.
So we decided that probably a thing that the cluster could work on would be dealing with harmonizing heterogeneous data, particularly because we're interested in point source data. Point source data is oftentimes very heterogeneous because it is collected from a large number of different physical devices, which have a tendency to have more variation than, say, satellite data, where there's a relatively small number of devices that have global coverage. So we thought that there could be a series of presentations about this notion of in situ data heterogeneity and how one deals with that. And then from that, we would come up with not only a kind of a general guide, but also some specific case study examples where those ideas were then applied to actual information.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is the natural disaster group ready to tell me what we're supposed to do now?
Yes, so, in talking about natural disasters and health effects, there are some obvious things that came out. One being that not all natural disasters are the same, and so answers are going to be different, but there are some commonalities. So one thing we kind of identified is that there's room here for some open source tools for spatiotemporal joins. And this can particularly be focused on some of the challenges that arise with the need to anonymize data, and you work with anonymized data. And it seemed like a place where there's some low-hanging fruit. The health side obviously seems the harder of the two, coming from our backgrounds. And the need to perhaps have some kind of exploratory analysis of the firewalled side of the data, simply so that you can know what is the metadata that's available and have that at least tell you what's there and what are the measurements of missingness and things like that, so that you can properly prepare grant proposals and understand what it is that is in the landscape without having to first fund your exploration of the data in order to ask the questions. Is that a good roadmap?
Yes, yes. I have things, thank you for that, yes. The wheels are turning. So now we have group 3, who is the online group. I would love to hear what, I believe they were discussing long-term cumulative impacts of air pollution.
Can you hear me, Ann?
Oh, yes. Hi, Tim. I can hear you.
Good afternoon. Well, yeah, afternoon. So yeah, we had a really good discussion, and you're not going to be surprised when you hear what I have to say, which is we should learn from digital libraries and catalogs to work to align metadata across diverse fields. And there is a long history in that information science field of doing this, and I think there's a lot to be learned from librarianship that we should be thinking about. And this solves the problem that there's a lot of hyper siloed research, and we all end up doing our own little thing instead of trying to build something that actually is interoperable, which is what libraries have been doing for a while. And then what are we missing? Well, gosh, we need to find some people who are really interested in working on this problem and get them working on it. So hopefully that was useful.
Hopefully that's the interested people are in our cluster. That's what I hope. Okay. Great, thank you so much. Let's see, I don't know how much time we have left, but this is basically just the wrap-up slide, okay? So I don't think anyone here is going to argue that the environment has a massive impact on health, and the data that we need to understand this impact is not readily integrated. And so you did some excellent brainstorming and identified some examples and some things that the cluster can do moving forward. And so we will be discussing this at our next cluster meeting, Geodata for Health. We meet on the second Thursday of each month at noon Boston time, so that's the Eastern time zone, although I don't know if we're on standard or daylight, or I don't know. I can't keep track of that. So I do cities, right? So if it's noon in Boston on the second Thursday of each month, then we're having our meeting. And you can go to our cluster website here for ESIP to find all the links to the calendar and the Slack and the email list and all that good stuff. All right. Thank you so much. And I will say that the Funding Friday is on Thursday, and I heard some interesting things that might be a good Funding Friday pitch. All right. Okay, thanks everybody. See you at lunch.